Hello, Internet. My name is Melissa, and I am the artist behind Wish This World Felted Fiber Arts. And this is my first ever felting kit that I'm going to put out. And in this video, we'll go over how to make this silly little donut here. He's gonna look something like this. How fun will that be? Now, if you don't already have the kit, you could buy it. It should be available on my Etsy shop. Or if you are already a fiber artist and you have all of your own wool, feel free to follow along. There may be a few of the sizing things that you'll have to figure out on your own, but other than that, you can do this with pretty much any wool that's, good for felting with. So let's take a quick look at what materials are actually in your kit today. First up is probably going to be the pipe cleaner. This will be sort of our support structure for making a nice round shape with a hole in the middle. And then we have a whole bunch of this sort of yellowy white, and it has quite a few little specks in there of vegetation. Don't worry about that. This is core wool. This will be on the inside of our sculpture, so you won't really see any of those sticks. It is less processed typically than our colored wools, so we use that for the inside to save some money and be more eco-friendly here. And then we have our nice wools. Well, nicer anyways. We have brown for our skin of our donut, some pink for the frosting in our donut. We have a felting pad that has some nice little markers on there to help us get all the sizing down. And then we have this bag, lots of little colors in there. We'll use those later for sprinkles. And then you'll also see that there is a bit of white in here. And if you have a bright enough light, you might be able to see it. If your living room or wherever you're working is a bit dark, it may be hard to notice at first, but this is kind of in the same category as our colored wools. So it's the same price range and a lot less filled with sticks. It is a little bit whiter. They use a brightener on it, just a little bit. This will be for our eyeballs, so don't mix that into your main stash of core wool, because then you'll be sad and you'll have yellow eyes. Last but not least, we have all of our pointy stuff safely enclosed in a little test tube type deal. There's a bit of cotton on the top. That's just to help the needles from moving around too much. And then when we pull these out, we have 2 straight pins. These are just regular sewing straight pins. The color of them does not matter and may vary by kit. But then we have 2 needles, and the colors do matter on these. The real simple explanation on the differences between these 2 needles is that this red guy is a big, thick one, relatively speaking. It'll move more wool and it'll move it faster. But it will, because it's bigger, it's going to be a little harder to push through, and it'll make bigger holes. So this is kind of a building needle is usually what people use it for. And they'll call this one a finishing needle. This one's much thinner. It has a little bit of a spiral on its tip. I don't know if you can see that. You probably can see it on your own. And this will leave a much more dainty hole. And I wanted both of these to be in the kit because it does make a difference to use both, but if one of your needles breaks, you can actually complete this whole project with just one of them. It just will affect a little bit on how fast you work and how bumpy the structure will be. So we have our needles. Let's talk about needle safety just real quick. First of all, always, if you're not using one needle or both needles, park them somewhere, pointed side down. You don't want to leave them out like this. You don't want to hold them in your hand like this. You might poke yourself, and these are indeed very sharp. Keep them away from small children and pets. And then when you are poking with them, you want to keep it at the same angle when it's in the wool. So if I'm poking straight up and down like this, I want to pull up. straight up and down like this. Let me switch to the finer needle for this example. I made a big old dent right there. The power of poking. So if I'm moving too fast, I may be tempted to kind of like start shifting my hand like this, and it will let you. There is a bit of flex, especially in this finer needle, but you'll stress the metal out and you may potentially break a needle that way. So try to always keep it at the same angle while you're poking, and then after you've poked, then you can change the direction later. Okay? And then one minor bit of housekeeping before we get to the actual instruction, I promise we're almost there, is that today I am going to be using a few things that aren't in your kit, but you don't need to have them. All right, first up is a pair of needle nose pliers. Most people will have these either in their first aid kits or their beauty kits. And essentially, when we get to our nicer wool, there'll be a lot less sticks in it. But sometimes there still are some, and I prefer to use my needle nose pliers to pluck out those little sticks. If you don't have one, you can always just use your fingers to pluck it out too. So not really a necessary thing, just something nice to have if it's around. And then the other item I'll be using today is a needle handle. If you don't have a needle handle, you're just going to hold the needles by pinching them and usually resting a finger up here and poke. You can even do this, but it slides a bit more when you do that. But with a needle handle, it just gives me something larger to hold on to, and therefore it'll not stress my wrist quite as much. And I do felt many hours a day, many days of the week, so every little bit helps. So again, you don't need to have a handle, but I prefer one. So if you really like this, you might want it for yourself. And I did color coordinate the handles. So the red needle is in the red handle and the green needle is in the green handle. So you'll still be able to follow along with what I'm doing. Finally, we're ready to make our donut. So our first step, we're going to grab this pipe cleaner and we're going to make a 2-inch circle. And that will be this inner silver circle right here on our felting pad. And what you want to do is you just kind of want to roughly, line up the pipe cleaner with that circle. It doesn't have to be perfect. Making sure that there's 2 tail ends there. We'll pinch it, and then we're going to just fold our tails back onto the circle part of our pipe cleaner. And don't worry about the circle. We'll fix that once we have this all wrapped up. Voila. Okay, and now that it's wrapped up, I can actually sort of adjust the circle. It won't have to be perfect, but make it a little more round. Yeah, that looks about right. So go ahead and pause this video, make your circle, and when you're ready, we'll get to the next step. So our next step is going to be breaking down our core wool and making it more manageable so that we can put it on our pipe cleaner. This piece is much too long. We want something, roughly 6 to 12 inches in length. So to split this in half, I'm going to kind of grab it so that there's a space in the middle there. And I don't have to hold it too hard. I'm just going to tug and voila, it rips apart. Now what we're going to do with these shorter pieces is we're going to split them usually into quarters. So straight down the middle, you're going to want to tear from the middle. This will make your strips more even in size versus tearing from the top. So split it in the middle, pull apart. I'm going to go ahead and split each of these again, just like so. If you have a particularly chunky piece, this one's a little on the wide side, you can go ahead and give it another split. The smaller the strip is, the more manageable it'll be, but at a certain point, sometimes they get so small it feels fiddly. So at this point, go ahead and pause the video while you sit there and split all your little strips, and I will see you again in just a minute. And welcome back. Now that you have all of your nice little strips, we're going to go ahead and cover our pipe cleaner. To do that, take one of the tail ends of your strip, sort of just hold it against your pipe cleaner, and we're going to pull it through the center, wrap around, and move our thumb to that new loop. Through the center, wrap around, and thumb. And if you do this like this, the pipe cleaner will actually hold the wool pretty well. You can see it's not actually unraveling on me on that other end, which is awesome. So I'm going to wrap and wrap until we get all the way to the end of a strip, like this. And when we get to the end, we're going to sort of wrap it around, make sure it's kind of tight. And then we're going to give it just a couple of little pokes. And that will make sure that the wool stays there long enough for us to wrap the next layer. With the pipe cleaner level, it almost always stays, but once you get, to your next strip, sometimes it needs a little help staying there. So we grab our next strip, and wherever our, piece of wool ended up, we're going to just start with the next strip. And we're going to continue around in a circle. Just like this. When you're wrapping, you want to try to keep your pressure as even as you can. If you don't, say if it got really loose like this, we can fix that later on. We'll just have to poke it a bit more. But having a nice, consistent pressure will help you. So if I were to let go of this, look at that. It's going to start to unravel. That's why we poke our little guys at the end there. I am poking with my green needle just because it's easier to push through the wool, and I just need a few quick pokes. And that's why I've chosen that needle for that particular step. So you're going to keep wrapping new layers until you reach all the way to this outer white line. And through the magic of television here, I have an example of kind of how it'll look. This one's almost a little too pudgy, if I'm being completely honest with myself, but that's okay. So when you wrap all the way out, like this final little wrap is going to be hard to get through the hole, don't worry. This hole will open back up as we do our actual felting. And in fact, you can kind of see, if I were to put my fingers in here and just lightly pinch, there's a lot of fluff that can be pushed down. And when we felt, that's what's going to happen. But don't worry about that too much. Let's just start with wrapping. So we're at another pause point. Wrap until your core wool gets all the way to the outer circle. See you soon. All right, welcome back. We're gonna start finally felting. Yay! So grab your needle. Probably the green needle is easiest when you're doing the first pass through. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna poke all the way through, almost down to our foam pad. And make sure when you poke, you do poke on top of a foam pad. Resist the urge to hold it up to yourself and poke it like this, because I promise you, you will eventually stab yourself. So keep it down on your table, on your work surface, with the pad to protect. But we're just going to poke almost at random, it's going to feel like, just everywhere. Paying a lot of attention to sort of any fluffy areas that are extra soft. Those will be the ones I'll attack first. But overall, it'll start to smooth out the shape. We're only a couple of pokes in, and I feel like the roundness is starting to already show through. So we're going to take a couple of passes, flip it, take a couple of passes on the other side. And the reason why we keep it pretty random and loose instead of focusing very much on one section is that that section will get felted, but it'll be a sort of a dense sort of wall, and it'll be harder to get everything to sort of line up and match as far as density and appearance goes. So kind of work around your sculpture and it'll build up thickness. And we can even, while we're doing this, flip it up on its side. You know how this hole looks, a little questionable. If we start poking down through the center here, it'll actually open up the center of our donut. So you can kind of see it. I'll flip and I'll do it from the other side here. And a little bit more, just a little bit more. You can now start to actually see the pad through that hole. So the more you do this, the more dense, the firmer the wool will become. I think the most common adage for felters to say, like when, figuring out how firm your wool needs to be, there are two camps. There's usually the rock hard camp, and they want it as solid as possible. Benefits of doing that is that it'll be a lot more sturdy. If someone picks it up and plays with it, it won't deform as much. However, it takes a lot longer. And, I think the squishability, of felting is one of the key things. So, the other camp is sort of a medium firm. If you're familiar with like a steak, a medium well steak, if you push in, it kind of bounces back. Whereas this one right now, I can kind of dent it quite a bit. So this has more ways to go. But the first couple of times I did a piece, I didn't quite, until you make a few, you don't really know what that kind of firmness feels like. And that's why I've added this slightly smaller circle here, the golden one. If we poke this enough, and we've started with about the same amount of wool, we can poke it down there and it'll be the right firmness. Yay! And so if you do future felting projects, you'll be able to feel your old donut and be like, okay, that's my goal right there. So believe it or not, you poke this enough and it will be like that. And that's your cue. We are headed towards a pause screen, so go ahead and poke your donut down into a donut shape. Welcome back. You should have a nice firm donut now. And we are going to work on the brown layer next. If you have any sticks in there that look like they're going to get in your way, you can pluck them out now. This one's not too bad, in all honesty. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to split this in a couple of ways. First, we're actually going to sort of tear it down the center, kind of like separating 2-ply paper towel. We want to see if we can't make 2 layers out of this, just like that. And then we'll go ahead and split it down the middle like we did with the white, or the core wool rather. And the reason why we separated it down into 2 layers is that this is already the shape we want. If we add a whole bunch of brown, it's going to balloon it out, and then we'll have to poke a whole bunch to make it back down to the size we want, right? So you really want to have kind of a nice thin layer. It covers pretty well. You'd be surprised. I found a few new sticks here. And in fact, this is still pretty fluffy for my taste. What I'm going to do is just sort of lightly stretch it like so, and that'll just help kind of thin it out a little bit. It's not an entirely necessary step, but it can be helpful to have a nice thin layer. So attaching this is not really going to be anything new at this point. We're going to sort of hold that there and push this through our center hole and wrap it around. Push it through, wrap it around. You probably won't need to use all of your brown, and that's good. Don't stress about trying to use all of it. And in fact, if you're planning on making an alternative expression, like we'll be going over how to make this expression, right? But if you want to go and verge off on your own and make a different expression, you could save a little bit of this brown so that you can make some eyelids. And in fact, I think the next kit that I'm going to make will just be another donut kit, but with lots of expressions, once we have all this core stuff out of the way here. But at any rate, we're just going to keep wrapping this around and poking it down until the whole donut is covered. All right? So, with that in mind, go ahead and wrap your donut and then poke everything so that your donut shape is firm and looks like a donut again. And I will see you on the other side. All right, fiber friends, I hope wrapping and re-poking your donut wasn't too hard. You'll have to let me know how this kit goes for you in the comments below, because it is, like I said, my very first one, so working out some of the kinks. Our next step is going to be the frosting, so we're going to grab out our little strip of pink, and we're going to do that 2-ply paper trick again. So we're going to try to split it so that there's 2 thin layers, just like so. And then what I'm gonna do, this is a little wide for my donut, so I'm just gonna stretch it just a tiny bit, because I want the frosting only on top. If you're feeling creative, you can make like drippy frosting. It just takes forever, so I don't normally do that on my donuts, at least not anymore. But anyways, I've thinned this out just a tiny bit, not a lot. And what we're gonna do, we're going to start anywhere on your top, and I'm going to poke this end down, trying to keep it a little wispy, not too solid. And then I'll poke forward a bit. I am using my green needle. It is my more delicate needle, so it's not going to make a bunch of really big dents in the frosting, because this is a top layer. We want to kind of start getting a little more finesse, right? So once you've poked, I don't know, maybe an inch or so, half an inch, I'm just going to kind of like pull this just a little bit. Hold it down and poke about the same amount and rotate again. Now, there's a very good chance that just this one single strip is going to get me all the way to the end. It is super hard to measure out exactly enough wool, so I've tried to err on the side of having too much of everything rather than, making the kit a little hard because the supplies are not where they need to be, right? So I'm just going to keep going until I have it all the way to the end here, and I'm going to kind of loosen this up just a bit. You can kind of tug on it, loosen it up, pinch before you're felted. You don't want to just tug like this because you'll rip it up, but pinch and tug it just a little bit. And what this does is, since it's nice and loose, it'll kind of lap over, be a layer that's not super obvious. We don't want any hard lines in our frosting. And voila! The only thing I'm going to really do at this point is kind of tuck in those edges and roll them around and make sure there's no big bumps in it, right? Which there doesn't seem to be. All right, so go ahead and work on your frosting until it looks roughly like this, and I'll see you at the end of the pause. Now we are ready to play with all of those fun colors. Can finally unbag them. And what I want you to go ahead and do, the red should be kind of more chunky than all of the other detail colors. That's because we're using it for sprinkles and for a tongue. And just to make sure we have enough for the tongue, let's go ahead and tear that in half and set whichever one seems bigger off to the side for now. That way you know you have enough red for your tongue. Now to make a sprinkle, I'm going to go ahead and remove my donut for a little bit because I want this surface. We're gonna make the rough shape of our sprinkle on here, and then we'll sort of refine it a little bit once we get it on the donut. And then, so what I'm gonna grab this, and I'm gonna pinch off just like teeny tiny wisp. I don't know if, there we go. A teeny tiny wisp of the wool. And the way to kind of tell if you have too much or too little here, so I'm going to lay it on my thumb. If it's reasonably around the size of my thumbnail, then it's probably about the good size, but only if I can sort of see through it, right? It's almost got some holes in there, it's transparent. That's the best analogy or example I can give you for how much, it's such a tiny amount of wool. And what we're going to do, we're going to lay it down on our mat, and we're going to take probably our green needle, and we're going to poke a line just through the middle of it, just like that. You kind of noticed how the ends sort of curled up a little bit when we poke that down. And then what we're going to do is you can either kind of use your finger to guide it over, or if you are feeling fancy, you can gently use the tip of your needle. Just don't drag it against the foam because that might break it. So we're going to fold it over the line that we had felted. We're going to poke it just a little bit more, and then we're going to fold it back in on itself. Only a couple of pokes, because what's happening now is these fibers are actually getting poked down into the mat. If we poke it too much, we won't be able to get our sprinkle back out in one piece. So after just a couple of pokes, I'm going to very gently, lift this out, and you can kind of see, if I look at this, you see how one end has sort of like a comb shape? That's because we poked from here down into the pad, and that's how much wool actually got pushed through by the needle. So we're just going to lift that and flip it. And then let's go ahead and poke it just a little bit in the center so it stays on our mat. You'll see that just a couple pokes like that means that this little bit of wool isn't going to fly away. It's not going anywhere. So a couple of pokes just to make sure it stays where it's at. And then I'm going to kind of just pull up the ends. Same sort of thing, you can use your finger, you can use your needle, and just pull up the ends. Now, all we're going to do is we're going to kind of keep lifting and poking, and that will turn our almost rectangle of a sprinkle into a more rounded shape, because we want it to be, 3D. We don't want to just paint on a sprinkle. And once it feels pretty firm, you're probably done. It is a little fuzzy still. That's 100% okay, because it's going to get poked again when we put it on our donut. So let's go ahead and go over those steps one more time. We're going to pinch off a little bit, roughly the size of my thumbnail. It's kind of see-through. That looks about right. Poke a line down the center, flip it up towards the line, flip it back. We're going to lift, poke it down, tuck in our ends, and then we're going to kind of lift and turn until it sort of rounds out and looks, like a cylinder. Voila, just like that. So keep on doing that with as many colors as you would like. I'd recommend, doing at least 12 sprinkles. 15 seems to be the golden number for me, because half of the colors I'll do 3 sprinkles of, and half the colors I'll do 2 sprinkles of. Kind of give that illusion of randomness while still having a lot of color balance. So we are at our next pause point. Go ahead and make all of those sprinkles. All right, fiber friends, you should have all of your sprinkles now. I'm going to go ahead and just grab one out here. And I'll lay it anywhere on the donut. Doesn't really matter where, because we're gonna fill that top up and make it look nice and random. So I'm grabbing my straight pin and I'm just gonna pin that sprinkle down. It's a little tiny fiddly thing, and if we were trying to hold it with our hands while we're poking with the needle, we might hurt ourselves. If you get more experienced, you can get rid of the straight pin, but honestly, this just kind of makes everything a little easier. And when we poke this, we don't want to poke straight up and down. What that'll do is it'll sort of compress the sprinkle down into the frosting and give it more of a painted look instead of, the sprinkle being its own separate thing. So to kind of keep the roundness of the sprinkle, we're going to go in at roughly a 45-degree angle and sort of poke right where the sprinkle meets the pink. And we'll do the same from the other side. You can rotate this around to make that angle easier on you. And after a couple of pokes, you won't really need the straight pin anymore. And then I'm just going to keep going around basically the base of my sprinkle, catching a few of those orange hairs and mixing them into the pink hairs. And that will make it look like the donut, has some volume, has some shape to it. So let's go ahead and we'll do one more together. You'll notice that my sprinkles are not all the same size, and that's fine. I hope no one's stressed out about sprinkle size. One of my kit testers had mentioned that she wanted them all perfectly the same, and I was like, that's not what sprinkles do. Anyways, I have pinned this down, and I'm going to go at it at an angle, just at the bottom where the sprinkle sort of meets the frosting. After a couple of pokes, I can lift up my straight pin and go here. And you'll notice that I'm rounding out the shape. I'm occasionally going from the top if it looks a little too fluffy. And now that we've done that, they don't really look so fuzzy. These ones look very fuzzy, but once you do this, they look nice and solid. So go ahead and continue doing that until the whole surface of your donut is full of sprinkles. I'll see you real soon. Welcome back, fiber artist. If you have successfully put all of your sprinkles on, then congratulations, you have a donut. Now we could stop here, right? But I imagine part of the appeal of the kit was that silly little expression, right? So we get to work on that next. First up, we're going to make the eyeballs, so we're going to get out the nice white. This is the one that we were hiding away in our bag so that we didn't use it for the inside of our sculpture, right? And what we're going to do, we're going to split it down the middle, but we're going to try to be as even about this as we can. Good thing we've had lots of practice splitting down the middle by now. So now we have 2 strips. Go ahead and put one aside. Now with one of your strips, what you're going to do is you're going to roll and pinch. Roll and pinch. And you'll notice when I'm doing that, I'm kind of giving it a slight twist as I roll it over. And that is forming the basis of a ball. It's a ball with a tail, but that's good. And we're going to keep doing that. It doesn't have to be a perfect sphere, okay? Don't stress about it. And when we get about, I'd say yay big, about the size of that black inner circle on our diagram here, we're going to want to pinch it and then pull off any excess that we have, because we don't want giant eyes. Well, you might, but it's easier to pinch it off. And that way you have a better chance of making both eyeballs relatively the same size. So I'm just holding this right now. If I were to let go, it would unravel a bit and we'd have to kind of work on it. So before I do that, give it a couple of pokes and that'll kind of seal in that edge. Now this isn't a perfect circle, but that's okay. We're going to use our needle to sort of adjust that shape. So kind of working on the fluffy outer parts first. I'm going to give it a few pokes and then rotate it around. The more we kind of roll this around and focus on anything that's sort of extra fluffy or poking out too much, the more we can guide this into a nice round shape. So just rolling around. And you can start to see how even just that far, we've gotten it pretty rounded out. And you're going to keep going until roughly about there. So if I kind of squeeze it, it still has a bit of fluff to it, but it doesn't change shape. You know, it's almost kind of bouncing back to its shape. And that's actually another fun way to know if your ball is solid enough. It'll actually bounce just a tiny bit. The more you felt it, it'll bounce a little higher, but not by much. They're not bouncy balls after all. But so go ahead and do this with both of your strips of wool. Pause the video and we will attach our eyeballs once you're done making both of them. And welcome back. I have two balls. They're roughly the same size. I'm not stressing about the fact that they're a little off from each other, and you shouldn't either if yours are a little bit off. If one is like super big and super small and you've just run out of wool and you can't poke it anymore, you know, poking the big one to try to make it smaller, then you know you should just lean into it and have like a really extra crazy expression. That's usually what I do when I completely fail at making two eyeballs the same size. At any rate, it is time to attach our eyeballs. So pick a spot, maybe one where the sprinkles haven't gone down quite as far. And I usually line my eyeballs kind of on the frosting line. So like right there is a good spot. I'm going to kind of hold it down and I'm going to use my straight pin to kind of keep that in place while I put on my second eyeball. And I do this so I can kind of figure out distance. Like, do you want like a super derpy donut? Do you want like an oddly scared donut? I usually place mine about an inch apart. It might be an inch and a quarter right there. But adjusting the length or the distance between the eyeballs will help you play with the expression if you get to that point. So the straight pins are in, and I'm going to kind of give it a quick look around, see if I like that spot. I think this eyeball ended up being just a hair too low, so I'm just going to lift right here and adjust. How nice is that? Now to attach the eyeballs, we're going to do the same thing we did with the sprinkles. We want to focus kind of at the base of the eyeball. We don't want to push too much from the top and flatten it out. So from the base, I'm going to go at an angle, grab some of those bottom hairs, and really make sure I push them down into the donut. I'm using my green needle once again because I'll be honest, I use it for like 75% of my time, just because it goes through easier. But after we get this attached a little bit, we may need the red needle. The red needle will be a bit more forceful with the wool, and we want a nice strong connection between the eyeball and the donut, because otherwise you might be playing with it and you could potentially tear that eyeball right back off. So once I know I kind of am happy with the connection, I'll switch to the red one so that I can make it stronger. And in fact, once I'm super, convinced that this part is stuck, of course the pin can come out. And then I can think about editing the shape a little bit. And I'll switch back to my green one for that and kind of just poke all around. Make sure that our eyeball, is spherical and, kind of looks like it is in the donut a little bit though. We don't want it just resting on top of the donut. And voila, we've got our first eyeball on. So go ahead and do that with both of your eyeballs and meet me at the end of the pause break. Alrighty then, my eyeballs are attached and I am ready for some pupils. Now in our example donut, they are actually facing this way, like he's looking off into some silly direction, who knows? But you can play around with where the pupils go. And a good way to sort of test that out without committing to anything is just use your straight pins. So if we have our pupils, we're going to imagine, you know, this pink part here is our pupils. If they're straight in, it's kind of a perturbed look, right? Like he doesn't know what's going on in life. He's seen some things. If we instead decide to kind of go inward, this is going to be like your extra silly, right? Cross-eyed sort of a look. If he's like thinking about something, or he's just not sure if he wants to be, you know, sticking his tongue out at you, he may look up like that. So figure out where you want to put your pupils. Let's just say I'm going to do this one straight on like that. I'm going to set that down, grab out some black. We're going to pinch off a little bit. This is probably about half of what I used for a sprinkle. So if a sprinkle was thumb size, then this is more like pinky size. Yeah, let's say it's pinky size. It might actually be ring finger size, but so just a little bit of wool is the moral of the story there. I'm just going to set it right there, right around there, and give it a poke. Okay, pull out my pin, because I don't need it as a marker anymore, and you can pull out that one too if you're feeling confident. We're going to give it a couple of pokes straight in the center, and then with our tip we're going to kind of guide all of these edges of wool back to that center. As I do that, it compresses in, and voila, we have a pupil. Now if you find that your pupil is like sinking down into your piece, so like this is still pretty fluffy, this will do it. It's good to have little examples around, isn't it? So if you're taking your wool and you're poking and you find that it goes straight in there like that, two things. One, if you're unhappy where it is, you can actually fish it back out if you really need to with a pair of pliers. If you don't have a pair of pliers, you can actually just push it all the way in and cover it back up with some white. And so you can kind of fix it that way, but ultimately, if you're seeing that your pupil is sinking in, that means it's too fluffy, right? This is my fluffy donut. It hasn't been felted enough, and that's why that wool went so far in. If your eyeballs are harder, it won't go in so far. So if your eyeballs are soft, you know, take a moment to just firm them up before you do your pupils. My eyeball is about the right firmness for what I want, so I'm going to go ahead and I'll do the other pupil as an additional example. I'm going to kind of just line. That might be too much. See, I didn't compare to my pinky. There we go. So we're just going to put that there, give it a poke. Now that I know where I want it to be, I can lift out that pin, give it a couple of pokes straight in the center, and then we're going to start folding our edges back towards that center. Just like so. And you can pretty much tuck in all the loose hairs this way. This particular type of wool lends itself nicely to not frizzing as much as some. And voila, I have two pupils. Now, I'm actually perfectly content with the fact that this one's just a hair larger than that one. If you're the sort of person that needs them to be even, which there are people like that out there, grab your thicker needle and kind of poke down till you sort of see it shrink. Like I'm intentionally right now pushing this further in. And voila, now those two are closer in size, and I could keep fiddling with it, but I'd recommend not going too crazy with trying to be precise. This is a silly donut after all. He's gonna be a little wonky. So, pause the video and I will see you after you've got your pupils on. Now that we have those pupils on, it's time to work on that smile. So first up, let's grab that little bit of fluff of leftover black. You know, when we did our pupils, hopefully we didn't use it all. And what I want to do, let me move this so you can see it a little clearer, is that I want to kind of make this more of a string or a strip. And before we would always tear, but this is such a tiny amount that tearing might not be the best idea. So instead, we're gonna what's called draft it, which is we pull it just a little bit. We move our fingers and pull it just a little bit. And you can see how that is now becoming longer. And as long as we're gentle about it and we keep moving our fingers along the length of our black, it'll kind of turn into a chord pretty much on its own. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take one end of it and sort of just twist it a little bit in my hand, with my fingers rather. And that'll help kind of make it more string-like as well. And I won't actually do the twist all the way down. It's way more black than we need for our smile, but just a little bit. Just like that. Now I'm going to attach our smile, and I'm basically going to start right at the eyeball and maybe just a little inward of where the pupil is. So about right here-ish. And I can even, if I'm nervous about it, kind of put a pin in there. And then I'm going to poke it in. And just like with our pink, we're going to kind of push and pull this to help decide where that curve is going to be on our black. Just like that. And all the way up to the other side. And if this looks like it's kind of unraveled a little bit, just stretch it a bit again. Just like so. And we're going to want to end right by the eye, slightly inward of my pupil. That'll keep the smile mostly even. They don't always end up perfect. And now to get rid of this tail, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch right there, kind of firmly. I'm going to pull, and that'll tear most of this off. And then any excess fluff, I'm going to poke back inward towards the other edge of the smile. And that'll get rid of any stray hairs that we might have. Not too bad, right? It hardly seems worth a pause screen, but, you know, just in case, pause here and make that smile. And now it is time to make our tongue. So we have that bit of red that we saved before. And, you know, don't worry too much about the exact amount of red. This is whatever half of your original red was, should be about right to make a tongue. I'm going to kind of, whatever side is shorter, you know, so it's less tall than it is wide, I'm going to orient it that way. So landscape mode for artists out there. And what I'm going to do is straight down the center, I'm just going to poke a line. And it's going to fold up just ever so much, right? And now with that line, I'm going to make sort of an arrowhead point. The sort of cross section here on the foam is a bit wider than we would prefer. So go in a little bit from the angle of this sort of crosshair here. So I'm just doing a line down. Now you see the wool's really rolling up on itself. And a line down. Then we're going to fold over that line and poke. Fold over the line and poke. And remember, don't poke too much. Just like with the sprinkles, it'll get stuck on your pad if you don't move it around. So now I'm going to lift it up and flip it over. And you'll notice it's already kind of rounding out. It's not a perfect triangle, and that's excellent because I don't know any tongues that are a perfect triangle. And then I'm going to poke it from the other side. And when I do that, I want to make sure that all of these outer edges of the tongue are kind of nice and tucked in, but I want all of this bottom here to be a bit loose. That'll make it easier to attach later on. So I'm going to poke a bit, ignoring the bottom, flip after I've gotten a few pokes in, and go the other direction. And you can use these pokes, so like, say I want the tongue to be skinnier. You can use your pokes to help further edit that shape, however you feel about the tongue. I've done wide tongues, I've done narrow, skinny tongues. I've done tongues that are licking their eyeballs so they're super long, right? And voila, that's pretty close to what I want out of a tongue. And I am pretty happy with that shape right there. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you to hit the pause button if you need to, and I'll see you in just a sec. Now on to attaching the tongue. This is our final step. If you have sort of a natural curve in your fluff, you can kind of follow the smile. That doesn't usually happen, I lucked out there. But if there's no natural curve, just overlap the smile a little bit. Okay, just like so. And we can put it anywhere, you know, tongue off to the side, center. I'm feeling this direction today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to poke this over my black. I'm going to try not to hit the brown so that I don't have to fix that later, but I do want to poke it over the black. And I'm just going to poke it in like so, following the curve of my smile. I'll flip it and do the same with the bottom. This will help strengthen that bond. The tongue will be your weak point. If someone young gets a hold of this, I don't know why, but every child who has ever picked up one of my donuts wants to pick it up by the tongue and flap it around. So now I work to make sure it's as stuck on there as possible. So I'm just going back and forth, top and bottom, and then to give myself a little bit of extra support, and the reason why I went over my smile is I'm going to add a layer of black. And what happens when I do that is that this is very loose and fuzzy, so it wants to felt. The donut itself, we felted before, so it's not actually as inclined to mix with new fibers. So I'm just going to get some of this black, and I'm going to go ahead and twist that up because it unraveled on me while we were sitting here. And then I'm going to go over the red, just like so. And that'll just give it another thing that is securing the tongue to the sculpture. And then what I usually like to do, it's a very, very minor detail. I usually add just a tiny bit of crease. I don't go all the way to the tip of the tongue, that looks weird, but say right about there. I'm just going to kind of poke in a little teeny weeny bit of black. I can do the same thing, sort of follow the curve and pinch off the extra. And voila, you almost can't even see that little extra bit, but I swear it makes, like, I don't know, more depth or something to the tongue. And with that, look, we're all done. We have a donut. Were you able to make it? Did it look awesome? You should let me know in the comments down below. This channel won't be seeing a lot of action. It takes a surprising amount of effort to set up these tutorials. But I do plan on making videos in the future, I hope. In the meantime, down in the description box below, I have some links to people I've learned from. Because, you don't usually learn in a vacuum. And there are a lot of really talented fiber artists here on YouTube already. So I'm going to link two of my favorites, and I will hope that I make another video soon. That's it for now. Thank you.